said this a week ago, and I'll say it now. It's truly moving and inspiring to see just how many of you there are. Such a wonderful group. Some of you b'nai mitzvah, but most of you will be up on this bima soon. Just a reminder, soon enough, you'll be here for your b'nai mitzvah. Well, good yontiv, everyone. Shabbat shalom. Do not make the mistake of thinking that ancient people were idiots. That was Dr. Mark Stein's advice to us in history class at Muhlenberg College, or at least that's how I remember him saying it. Maybe it was a little bit different. And it's stuck with me ever since. But we do it all the time. Consciously and unconsciously, we adopt a very inflated view of ourselves as 21st century people. And especially, it's easy for us, walking into our synagogue, engaging in rituals prescribed thousands of years ago, to think of ourselves as more advanced than the people from all those years back. But I believe that we need their wisdom now more than ever when it comes to two ancient phenomena that still exist in our world today. The first is idolatry, and the second is anti-Semitism. Perhaps the most famous story of idolatry is the golden calf. Moses had gone up to receive the commandments from God, and it took a while, 40 days and 40 nights. The people grew tired of waiting, so they built a golden calf and they worshipped it. And as I mentioned last night, Moses got so mad that he smashed the tablets of the law when he saw what was going on down at the base of the mountain. But that could never happen here in the 21st century, right? This story of worshiping a golden calf, surely that shows just how primitive our ancient ancestors were. How did those Israelites believe that a golden calf, something, had any kind of real power? Given all that we know today, who could possibly believe that a thing has any kind of real power? For those in the back, this is a cell phone. The danger of idolatry is that it seems so primitive. We contemporary people of the 21st century, we scoff at the idea that people used to pray to idols, to the figurines that we find scattered all over the archaeological record in Israel. And ancient people, they did more than just pray to these idols. They horrifically sacrificed their children to these idols. Who would ever make the trade of a child's life for the demands of some silly thing? Who among us did not cringe when we read the story of the binding of Isaac on Rosh Hashanah, the story of Abraham following God's call to sacrifice his son? As I mentioned on Rosh Hashanah, the story of the binding of Isaac marks the transition in the ancient world from human sacrifice to animal sacrifice. But today, on this Day of Atonement, I want to remind you that we do it all the time. The smartphone is the idol of our generation, and we as a society are no better than Abraham. We, too, often hold on to our smartphones above the needs of our children and grandchildren. For many of us, the smartphone has our attention at all times. We respond to it when it calls to us through push notifications, buzzes, and ringtones. And I get it. I get how the cell phone is essential. Essential to being available to others and essential to knowing the whereabouts and activities of our loved ones. It is a huge safety net for us in case we ever need immediate help, and our work lives have adapted to this technology. For many of us, it is now the expectation that no matter where we are in the world, that we are available for colleagues and clients all the time, especially for people in professions that can save someone's life. It is necessary. But the cell phone is very different than the smartphone. Like idolatry, the smartphone distracts us from what is most important in life. Smartphone distracts us from God, however you want to define that term or that idea. If you are the kind of person that finds God in nature, you may notice how our cell phones, our smartphones, pull us away from experiencing the natural world. Just look around next time you're in a park or somewhere outside. You'll see all of the people winding their way through nature with their eyes glued to their screens. If you find God in relationships, well, then I ask you, when was the last time you had a conversation with someone that was completely uninterrupted by a smartphone? And if you're the kind of person who just never understood how Abraham could have taken his son Isaac up that mountain and tried to sacrifice him to God, well, then just look back at the last time when you were staring at your phone, mindlessly saying, "Hold on just a second, honey. Mommy, daddy, grandma, grandpa just has to finish this one text message. I'll be there with you in a moment." Or perhaps, recently, amongst friends and the company of family, you may have been sitting there mindlessly scrolling through your social media feed. These are not random hypotheticals. These are things that on this Yom Kippur, I want to share with you that I have personally done this year and in years past, and I regret it. And I'm sorry that I've done it to all of those who it affected. And I don't think that I'm alone. Over the years, in some ways, we as a society have become idolaters. And in many ways, our youngest generations have become the sacrifice on the altar of the smartphone god. I want to acknowledge that some of the youngest adults among us here may disagree with me. And I am no longer in that category of youngest adults to truly understand your lived experiences. But what I can tell you is that from the perspective of Jewish tradition, is that the internet is a place where so much of Judaism warns against what happens there. It's a place where so much of what Judaism warns against is allowed to thrive, such as public embarrassment, judgment of others, and comparison of others to ourselves without fully understanding the other person's story. The absence of manners and decency is also encouraged, flying in the face of one of the most central Jewish tenets of all, love your neighbor as yourself. All of this bad behavior thrives on social media, and it follows us around on our smartphones. This does not mean that we have to give up smartphones and social media altogether, but I do believe that it is reason enough to be very thoughtful about how we use our devices and the platforms that are on them. There are young people whose lives literally depend on it. A study from the U.S. National Survey on Drug Use and Health measured the amount of young people who had at least one major depressive episode in the past year by self-report based on a symptom checklist. From the years 2010 to 2020, the report showed an increase of 145% for adolescent girls over that decade. For adolescent boys since 2010, although overall fewer cases were reported, there was an increase of 161%. In that same time period, 2010 to 2020, emergency room visits for self-harm by young teen girls rose by 188% and by 48% for young teen boys. Suicide rate for younger adolescents from 2010 to 2020 rose for boys by 91% and for girls by 167%. I learned these statistics in Professor Jonathan Haidt's newest book, The Anxious Generation: How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness. Haidt is a social psychology PhD who teaches at NYU's business school. He makes the case, I believe very compellingly, that the combination of smartphones and social media is not simply correlated to teen and young adult mental health problems, self-harm, and suicide, but that it causes mental health problems, self-harm, and suicide. Haidt argues that social media is a recipe for disaster for young adolescents. But when you couple the platforms with the smartphones, it becomes far worse. Now, the pressures of teenage life follow them home from school and follow them everywhere, even into the bathroom, even to bed. It is killing them. There is a great Polynesian expression that Jonathan Haidt uses in the book: standing on a whale, fishing for minnows. He uses this phrase to talk about how schools and the rest of society are doing so many things to try and correct course. Our educational institutions are hiring mental health staff. We are rethinking the role of homework and how it affects mental health. We are thinking more about diet and nutrition for our youth. And all of these initiatives, all of these programs, they are incredibly noble and worthwhile. But these changes, Haidt says, are just small minnows compared to the two major whales of an issue, of the presence of the smartphone and the disappearance of time for children to play with one another in an unstructured environment. At the end of Jonathan Haidt's book, he explains that actually the effects of the smartphone and social media on our youth was going to just be chapter 1 of a much farther-ranging book describing how the smartphone and social media are not only ruining teens, but pretty much everything in our society, from our educational institutions to our democracy. And while that book would have been a colossal project, I think that we as a society, especially now, we need that. We are staring down a moment of immense challenge as Americans and as an American Jewish community. I do not need to remind you that in just under 1 month, we will have a consequential presidential election in this country. And for many years now, and especially since October 7th, 2023, our Jewish communities here in the United States are experiencing unprecedented levels of anti-Semitism. These are both gigantic issues of our moment in time. And while there is no denying that this pivotal election and the rise in anti-Semitism are colossal issues, I believe that they are still minnows compared to the whale that is the smartphone and social media. I want to highlight 3 ways that our smartphones are posing a danger to us, especially when it comes to our democracy and anti-Semitism. The first is cognition. We are thinking less clearly than we used to because the smartphone is draining our cognitive capacity. In The Anxious Generation, Haidt cites a study of college students in which all of them were asked to complete a set of cognitive tests, even though in all 3 groups their phones were turned off. The study found that the closer this thing was to their bodies, from outside the room to sitting in their pockets while they were taking the test, and while having the phone just resting there, off, on the desk, we found that the worse they did on those cognitive tests, based on how close that thing was to their body. The second way that our smartphones and social media are negatively affecting us is outrage. We are trained by social media to express increasing amounts of outrage and contempt because it is these extreme emotions that attract the most likes and shares on our feed. And finally, the third effect is isolation. Going to a coffee shop, an elevator, or the lobby of an office building, and you will see for the past 10 years an unprecedented new way of behaving. Fewer people actually talk to each other. With mobile ordering and pickup, stores are basically becoming gigantic vending machines where you can go in and pick up your order without even having to order what you want in person. You don't even have to talk to a single human being. The people physically closest to us in the world are getting farther and farther away from our reality. Our ability to focus on the things that matter, our ability to control our rage towards others, our ability to play a part in keeping the fabric of our society together is waning. Judaism and idolatry have always been like oil and water. So it should be no surprise then that on the social media platforms pulling us away from what's most important in our lives, anti-Semitism is rampant and thriving. In her book, How to Fight Anti-Semitism, Barry Weiss explains that the anti-Semite punches both up and down simultaneously. Decrying the Jew as a threat to society for being way too powerful and controlling, the anti-Semite also, at the same time, is enraged at the Jew for being the scum of the earth, a complete drag on the bottom rungs of society, holding everyone else back. Jews have been hated for keeping to ourselves too much, and we've been feared for trying to blend into the rest of society. Jews have been blamed for not defending ourselves against our enemies, and we're blamed for defending ourselves too much. We have been hated for being stateless, and we are hated for having a state. By highlighting all of these contradictions, Barry Weiss beautifully articulates just how ridiculous anti-Semitism is. Yet the social media algorithms and the people scrolling through, they're blind to the contradictions. All that matters to the algorithms and the people consuming them is the rage. On social media, the paradoxes of anti-Semitism don't cancel each other out. Instead, it multiplies the possibility for anger and hate, two things that spread like wildfire on the internet, which means that it greatly increases the chances for anti-Semitism to thrive. The Hebrew Bible is full of calls to abolish idolatry from the earth, but that is not my goal with smartphones or social media. I recognize the value of the smartphone and social media. The phone that I've been holding up here today, this is not a prop, it's mine, and I use it all the time. I have Facebook and Instagram accounts, and in fact, you may have noticed over the course of these past few months, I've been trying to use those platforms to reach all of you, because that's where people are these days. Pretty ironic, I know. I love having my phone at work because my children are now old enough to give me a call or text me. I'm in touch with my wife, Rena, all the time. But after reading Haidt's book, I was incredibly alarmed. My gut reaction was, like Moses, to smash my tablets too. And as my children eventually approach their preteen years, I am especially concerned as a parent. I want to make the invitation to all of you here and now, especially to the parents, the grandparents, and teachers among us who have teens and young children at home or students in class, that we together as a community read The Anxious Generation as well as other literature on this topic and discuss what we might do to correct course as families and as an institution here at Congregation Beth Or. I want to make sure that we are prepared to protect our youngest generation together. The time will come to sit down and discuss together, but for today, I will highlight the two Jewish values that I believe must guide our way in these conversations. One is the prohibition against idolatry, and the second is the Jewish imperative to save a life. Over the years, I've developed the opinion that idolatry is far more than the worship of little figurines. I think of idolatry as anything that takes our eyes off of what is most important in life. And I have found that my smartphone gives me ample opportunity to do just that. It distracts me from where I want my attention to be. So recently, with the help of my brother Alex, who is far more tech-savvy than I will ever be, I've turned on a focus mode on my phone that automatically turns on when I arrive at my address, when I come home. When I open my phone, I have limited access to my apps, and I have 3 background photos on my phone that scroll through at random each time that I open it. One is a photo of my wife, Rena, and the other 2 photos are photos of my children, Mark and Sophie. My rotating background photos are a reminder to me that when I pick up the phone, and I do out of habit, it's a reminder to put the phone down and to go focus on the people that are most important in my life. Just this week, I had an opportunity to go and learn more about this subject, thanks to Beth Orr congregant, Dr. J. Roseanne, I was able to attend a talk by Dr. Jean Twenge, who researches generational differences and the effects of smartphones on all of us. She had a few more great suggestions that I want to share with you. First, turn off your screens an hour before bedtime. And if that's not possible, she said, even 15 to 30 minutes does a whole lot of good. And she is an advocate for going phone-free in schools from start to finish, including outside of the classroom. I'm curious about what kinds of ways we might want to experiment here at Beth Orr to maximize our socialization with one another and to maximize meaningful interaction. And then there is the Jewish value of pikuach nefesh, saving a life. There is still debate out there about just how dangerous smartphones are to teens, but I believe that there's enough data to show that the smartphone is far from harmless. There's a great power to them, and we must handle that power with care and concern. The issue is not only worrying clergy, it's worrying teachers, school administrators, parents, grandparents, and I believe it should be a concern for every one of us. It is no accident that earlier this year, our Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, wrote an opinion piece in the New York Times advocating for a warning label on social media, just as there is on cigarette containers and bottles of alcohol. Last month, 42 attorneys general across the United States advocated for a warning label as well. Even if that warning label were to save just one life, Jewish tradition says it's worth it. Today, through this sermon, I'm trying to place a figurative warning label on smartphones and social media for all of us, and especially for our preteens and teens. I think it is imperative that we as a community educate our students and parents about this growing issue, and that we partner with other local schools and organizations to try and figure out a better balance in a world that is dominated by an ever-expanding digital space. Jewish tradition still has something to say about our world today. Our ancient ancestors' wisdom from thousands of years back can still light our path forward. I see it as the project of this community, together, to synthesize our ancient wisdom with our modern world, and this is a way we can do it. May our shared project help us to focus on the things that matter most in our life: our family, our friends, our community, our faith, and our time-tested traditions. May we engage in the holy work together of reclaiming our focus on what is most important in the work of saving lives and in the work of building a better and healthier future for us all. Good Yantif, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.